Hi, guys. Hey, everybody.
Hey, everyone. Happy Earth Day.
Happy Earth Day. It's Robbie and Landon. We'll wait for some people to get in the room here. It's posting to Twitter. So, Benji, feel free to retweet it if you want to.
All right, I'll go in there.
While we get people here in the room, make sure it posted. Yep, it's up right now. Awesome. So, hi, guys. Hi, everybody. We're excited about today's episode because we've wanted to do this for a while where we cross-platform on a special day like Earth Day. And bring on somebody that we think has interesting ideas, and that we can all kind of have a very, stimulating conversation on a specific topic. So today, obviously, we're talking about environmentalism. Benji Backer is here with us. He's got an incredible, little movement that he's building right now about, environmentalism on the right, because young Republicans care about the environment just as much as, people on the left do, except for I'd say there's a lack of alarmism on the right, but there's still a call to action happening. So I want to welcome Benji to the show.
Hey, great to be here and really happy that you brought me on. And it's such an important topic, obviously, today. So excited to chat.
Yeah, we're super excited to have you. So, I think the natural thing, jumping off point here, is on the left, we see the Green New Deal, we see Greta Thunberg, we see, all those types of things happening, the Extinction Rebellion movement. And we see sort of this alarmism that I think it's really putting a fear into kids, and I think it's an unhealthy starting point for us to have these conversations. But it's a necessary point for us to tackle because, if we want kids or people on the right, conservative people, to be excited about the environment and excited about what we can do to have, cleaner air, cleaner water, we need to sort of separate these things out because, to be against climate alarmism and to be against the way that the left is behaving about climate does not mean that we're anti-science or that we're against the climate or anything like that. It just means we're looking towards a pragmatic approach to, caring about our planet. And I think that that's something that would it be fair to say you believe in too?
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, conservatives feel like Earth Day has not been something that they can engage with, since I've been alive. And that's a problem, right? Like today there are two large Earth Day live events with like Leonardo DiCaprio and AOC and all these people, and not a single one had a conservative involved. Yep. And then conservatives I've seen tweeting all day today about how like Earth Day is just a liberal, holiday or whatever. That's a problem. Like there's a disconnect there because conservatives do care about the environment and conservatives want to care about the environment. And they're the ones who live in the rural areas and the ones who live in the mountains and know how to take care of it better than anyone else. And if they don't, they want to know how. And so there's a huge disconnect there. But I actually think it boils down to what you were alluding to with like the alarmism and some of the problems that we see on the left is that humans are seen as not part of nature and we're seen as intruders to nature. But at the end of the day, we're actually part of nature. And we need to be able to interact with nature and be good stewards of our environment. And that's the difference between conservation and preservation, right? Like a preservation is this hands-off approach where you don't have any impact on your environment at all, and humans are completely separate. But conservation is constantly looking at how can we improve our environment, but also understanding the importance that resources have in our world and how we need to extract resources while protecting the environment at the same time and make sure that we're managing our wildlife and the environment as best we can. That's where conservatives need to stake out our claim. But the problem is the left has taken this issue and made it a political one, and then the right has completely disengaged. And so the message that I would give to conservatives is just simply re-engage. Just because you don't think that this is a issue that your values sit well with doesn't mean that it can't be, and doesn't mean that you shouldn't have your voice at the table. Re-engage. Make this a conservative issue. Make it a bipartisan issue. Make it a non-political issue. And if you don't like the solutions that the left is proposing, join an organization like ACC or figure out where you stand on it.
Right. We noticed that there's the Green New Deal that is a very flashy marketing opportunity to
really attract
basically
young people.
Promote socialism, communist type of ideas, in the guise of environmentalism. So I wanted to ask you, what about that doesn't work, and what are your ideas? Because I know you are putting forth something really innovative, and basically the first person I know on the right that has any sort of solution for this major concern that people have. So would you tell us more about that?
Yeah, so the Green New Deal itself is a lot of talk with no action. And if you look at the Green New Deal, it is literally just a framework with a bunch of arbitrary goals and arbitrary numbers that are easy talking points and easy things for people who do care about the environment to latch onto. People who like the Green New Deal do care about the environment, and they do have good intentions. I was actually on a panel with one of the top climate activists in the country in Texas one time, where she told me and the crowd that the only reason she supported the Green New Deal was because it was the only thing she knew of. And so that is that just kind of woke me up to the fact that we have a duty to propose some sort of alternative, because not only is the Green New Deal just a framework that has no policy behind it, but it's also not feasible, because the rest of the globe would never implement a Green New Deal, and environmental issues are a global problem. And it's actually not possible to go completely wind and solar powered in the next 10 years, which is what they're proposing. And they completely ignore other forms of energy that are super important to the future of the environment, which include, natural gas and nuclear and hydropower and those sources of energy. So what we've proposed is the American Climate Contract, which we launched yesterday. And what it does is it breaks it up into 4 pillars, similar to the Green New Deal. It's a framework. But what's different than the Green New Deal is that we actually have policies behind it. And we're not setting arbitrary goals just to score talking points. And yeah, maybe it's not as flashy or as, bold as the Green New Deal, but it's actually real, and it's actually tangible, and it's actually something that we can put forward. And it's focused on innovation and technology and capitalism, and pairing smart government, which we believe in as conservatives, with markets, and limited government, which we believe in as conservatives, with economic success and environmental success at the same time. And so we have 4 pillars that we've put together for it, which is energy innovation. So instead of just mandating which energy sources we use, why don't we innovate each energy source to lower its environmental impact? The second is 21st century infrastructure, which is upgrading America's infrastructure to be more clean and have better roads and better bridges for the environment and the economy, and also more efficient forms of transportation. The third is natural solutions. I'm wearing a hat with a tree on it. The best carbon remover in the atmosphere is trees. And we can plant more trees, and we can be better stewards of our environment by protecting our waterways that soak up carbon, and wetlands and marshes and so forth. And then the fourth is global engagement, because as I mentioned earlier, there is no way that we can solve environmental challenges without the rest of the globe working on it as well.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. And I was going to say too, one of the things I'm glad you brought up before is that this really is a natural issue for us on the right. It really is. You look at the areas that we live in, and one of the things that I always make sure to bring up when I'm talking to somebody on the left about environment is like, look at these areas that are controlled by the left. They're shining stars. These are areas that pollute more than anywhere. Now, on the flip side, look at the places where the right dominates the area, and you'll see the greenest counties with just lush wildlife and well-preserved nature. Mm-hmm. And I think that's where some of the disconnect happens too, just in terms of like a sort of mental framing about the issue, because we live in an area where if you look around, you're not perceiving any environmental issue because it is so beautiful, so perfect, so well taken care of. You won't find trash anywhere. And if you do see trash, you see people cleaning up the trash. Like I saw, just this week, more than one time, people out with their kids picking up trash. In my entire time living in Los Angeles, never saw that one time unless it was prisoners from jail. And I'm being serious. That's right. The only time I ever saw it in LA. So, that disconnect, I think, is a natural one that happens mentally. And it's something that we have to, like you said, just re-engage on the issue, because there's so many areas of environmentalism that are natural to us. Like you said, conservation. And there's so many hunters on the right too. It's an important area for us. Just think about farming too. It's so natural. There's so many crossover points. It's something we should re-engage on, and that we need to have alternatives to, because if the only option is the Green New Deal, like you said, if that's all young people see, unfortunately, some of them are going to fall into a trap where they think that socialism is the answer to environmental problems. And in reality, innovation is the answer. And I think that's the one thing that I've really connected with you on, is that, you're talking about solving problems with innovation. And at the end of the day, that's what makes America great, is every great problem we've ever faced, we innovated our way out of it. We didn't, go and police our way out of it and change the entire, way of life to be able to get out of it. We innovated our way out. And that's what we can do here too, is we can innovate our way out to have a better planet, a stronger planet, a safer planet, cleaner water, cleaner air. And that's something that I think is a message we can take forward and be able to sit at the table and fight, with our own plan.
That's exactly it. I mean, if you look at what you're talking about, hunters and fishermen are some of the best conservationists in the entire country and in the entire globe. And so the environmental movement has completely forgotten about some of the best environmental stewards in the entire country. They've forgotten about these rural Americans that know how to take care of the environment better than anybody else. And if you look at, even like the memes, right, that like the environmental community will share out, it's like a picture of the world getting more and more urban. The more and more urban folks are the environmentalists. They're the ones who are saying that they're environmentalists, but they're actually not the ones out there in nature every single day protecting it. And so they're telling rural areas what to do. And so you have this rural area and urban area divide. And so one of the things that we always talk about is how we shouldn't automatically assume that DC is going to have the answer to all environmental challenges, because you can't just assume that some senator from, New York is going to know what to do in Alaska. How would they know? Absolutely. And it's not their fault. But why would we rely on DC to solve most of these challenges? So what I propose is that we stop relying on DC and look at the approach this way. Okay, first, can a company solve this? Can the private sector solve this? If not, which a lot of times it's a yes answer, but if not, can a local government solve it? Okay, if the local government can't solve it, can the state government solve it? If not, then go to the federal government. So it's like flipping what we have on its head, because right now we're looking at the federal government first, and we're completely forgetting about the important role that sportsmen play and farmers and ranchers play, and the people who live out in the environment who take care of the timber industry and so forth. So we have to re-engage in that way. But I also think that it's partially, conservatives' fault for not putting that sort of timeline or those types of policies on the table, because when in America have we ever said, okay, we don't like those ideas, so we're just going to completely disengage? That should make us want to engage even more than we have been in the past. And so that's our opportunity to retake these issues. And so for those who are feeling disenfranchised by Earth Day or environmentalism, I would urge you to actually take the opposite approach of making fun of it or saying it's a liberal issue, and say, no, actually, I'm going to turn this on its head and say it's a conservative issue. It's my issue. I'm an environmentalist. I care about the environment. And if you're not an environmentalist, you're definitely a conservationist. And so it's our turn to re-engage on this. And honestly, I'm a person who believes in cross-partisan dialogue when it's possible. This is the one issue where it can happen. And I can tell you that the people who are active on the far left on this issue don't represent the majority of Americans. They don't even represent the majority of people on the left. So we have to re-engage all people on this issue, because most people just want a cleaner environment. And most people understand that markets can play a huge part of that. And they also understand that DC doesn't have all the answers.
Right. I think that brings me to a really good point. I feel is that there's so much, this negative discourse on the left and right about what the cause is. And I think that it's just completely counterproductive, and nothing ever gets done because there's such an argument, and, calling us science deniers, and, and then you have to look at the reality is that there's been a lot of false predictions. So I think that is really what creates the biggest divide in that conversation. And one way to, jump into this conversation is to say, hey, look, it doesn't matter. We think differently about what is causing pollution, whatever that you're concerned about, and let's focus on solutions. What is actually going to work? And I think that is where we have to shift the conversation, because I don't see us getting anywhere continuing to argue about the science, the fact that there isn't scientific consensus on some things, predictions and whatnot, and what you call it. Like the global warming clubs at school and stuff, they're, you know, I think they should be environmental clubs, because there's a shared interest of helping the environment and not making it political and not making it an argumentative issue.
Yeah, see, that I think that's a great point, because it's something that I've heard from conservative parents where they feel like, you know, at their schools, their kids' schools, there's all these global warming clubs, and there's no just pure environmentalism club. And that's an issue, because for a lot of people, they go, well, you know, the science on warming isn't settled. The climate change is 100%, but on warming, you know, we just had NASA 6 months ago come out and say we're entering a solar minimum that's going to cause temperatures to drop, you know. So I think looking at it from a temperature basis is sort of a disadvantage, you know, it puts everybody at a disadvantage, because it locks you into one thing versus just, hey, let's do positive things for the environment, which is where, you know, we should be focusing kids. So I think you're absolutely right. Well, what ends up happening is we get stuck so much on fighting about cause versus, hey, how can we all work together and do something positive that is going to make our planet a better place for the, you know, kids of the future? And that's really where we have to reorient ourselves, is out of that conversation, out of fighting about cause, and into just how do we, you know, solve problems.
Yeah, I mean, there have been, unfortunately, because climate change has been the topic of the day for a very long time, we've forgotten about some of the other environmental problems that exist, right? Like protecting public lands and wildlife and oceans and things that, no matter if the climate is changing super rapidly or not, like those issues still exist. And we can't forget about those issues. So I agree. I mean, that's why, like, our organization, we focus on climate change, but we also focus on protecting public lands and private lands and oceans and wildlife, because all environmental issues matter. And we can't just completely focus on one when there are plenty of others that are constantly being swept under the rug. And I also agree. I mean, I believe that humans have an impact on climate change. And I believe that there's a general consensus about that we have an impact, that we need to, you know, try to mitigate that. But there is no consensus on what specific level it is, because there are different scenarios with every climate change report. And for us, we take the most likely scenario into consideration. For someone like AOC, she takes the worst case scenario into consideration. And until we completely know the science, which is constantly evolving, as science is on every issue, we have to do what we can to solve what we know now, and not try to, you know, bicker and debate over, you know, X, Y, or Z. Let's talk about solutions, as you're talking about. So we know, even with coronavirus, right, like the smog has lifted over LA in a way that has never happened before. We know that we have an impact on the environment. Everyone knows that. They know that if they put a pesticide in their backyard or a weed killer, that's going to kill the weeds, and that they're like, we have an impact on a micro level and on a macro level. But why don't we talk about solutions instead of being so hung up over what percentage of this is happening because of X, and, you know, you're not taking it seriously enough, or you're taking it too seriously. I mean, let's just actually talk about solutions, because the solutions are there and they're waiting for us. And if we actually care about the environment, we would talk about solutions rather than debating pointless things.
Yeah.
Right. Well, while we're on that, will you speak more in depth on the clean energy? Because from what I understand, the solar initiatives from the Obama administration were a flop. And I don't know if you could elaborate more. You probably know more about that. And also the, you know, wind power, you know, with birds getting stuck in it and it actually being as effective, you know, versus
as alternatives,
right? As alternative energy. And what is the reservation about going, you know, nuclear? So could you talk more about the different, you know, clean energy options?
Yeah. So the most effective way to fight climate change is to embrace nuclear energy. And there are hardly any people on the left that are embracing that. Thankfully, Cory Booker actually acknowledged it during the presidential debates, which he was ostracized for. And the truth of the matter is, nuclear energy is the safest and cleanest energy source in the entire globe. And that has been proven by scientific study after scientific study. That wasn't the case 30 years ago or 20 years ago, but it is the case in 2020 and was the case for most of the 2010 decade. And so we have to embrace nuclear if we're going to solve this challenge, because nuclear energy can power an entire state. can power an entire country and can power numerous countries. Whereas right now, solar and wind energy can power cities and counties, which is actually a lot of times very great, but it's not going to power the world. And that's why I said earlier that by 2030, we won't be able to just have wind and solar energy, because you'd have to build like an entire United States filled with solar panels, like from square inch to square inch, to actually fix emissions and power our country. So nuclear has got to be a part of that equation. And in terms of solar and wind, a lot of what we've seen with the Obama era incentives is that the market provided more growth for wind and solar than those, incentives did. And that bailing out some of those industries actually didn't even help them. Like the solar and wind energies are competing at a market level right now. Texas's number 2 energy source is wind. And 4 out of the 5 top solar states in the country are Republican states. 3 out of the top 5 wind states are Republican states. So these energy sources are starting to work, but it's taken energy innovation rather than government intervention to solve the problems that existed with those sources of energy years ago. The other problem that people have with those energies is, as you were alluding to, wind and solar energies are not 100% clean because they kill birds, and it takes emissions to actually create the solar panels and create the wind turbines. And so when we're looking at energy, we can't say that anything is 100% clean, because nothing is 100% clean. You have to create those things, and they have to operate. And so if you're pretending that they are like just this angel from heaven guided by God to power our world, that's just not true. But they are great sources of energy to help us move forward, and they will be in the future. But right now, here in 2020, nuclear energy, natural gas, and hydropower are some of the cleanest energies that power communities, states, and the entire country. And then technologies like carbon capture can help reduce emissions on fossil fuel plants across the country. But I will say, for conservatives that are skeptical of the solar and wind industry, that skepticism was very warranted probably a decade ago, but today there is a lot of progress being made by those industries to become more market competitive. In a lot of areas of the country, it's actually cheaper to have those sources of energy. So what this all boils down to is that to look at our energy portfolio and to help the environment at the same time and provide jobs, we have to look at all energy sectors, and that's just the truth. So anybody who's not looking at all energy sectors and ways to reduce emissions on all energy sectors isn't taking this issue seriously.
So what would you say? I actually have 2 questions I want to press you on a little bit. One is, what do you say to people who say it doesn't matter what we do, because if India and China don't do anything and they stay on their track, that it doesn't matter what we do? And second question, which is somewhat related, a little bit off, what would you say to people who worry about, say, a Fukushima happening? Because I've been very warm towards nuclear energy. I think that it could be done, I think, what's the best way to put this? I think it could really reset everything for us in terms of energy. But there's those people who are very concerned about something like that happening. So what would you say to those people? And then to the people who say, if India and China don't act, basically it's not going to do anything for us to make a sizable impact?
Yeah, I mean, those are 2 of the top questions that we get as an organization and that I get all the time. And the first one is this: the United States has constantly been ahead of the curve at showing the globe what they need to do to move forward on different things, social issues, and just kind of, being the leader of the free world, but also the world, and moving in the right direction on things. We can do the same thing on lowering emissions and cleaning up our air and cleaning up our water, because we can be the example to the rest of the world. But the only way that being an example to the rest of the world is going to actually work is if we implement policies that they can implement in their own economies and in their own environments. And that's going to be market-based approaches like innovation and technology, because China and India are going to implement things that create them jobs and create them economic output. They are not going to implement a tax or a Green New Deal. They're going to implement carbon capture technology that helps clean up their air while creating jobs, or better battery storage technology for solar energy that they can implement that creates more jobs. I mean, it'll be those types of things that they implement. America is the only country in the world that can come up with those solutions on a scale big enough to actually work. And so we have the power to make a huge impact positively on the world. And so that's how we can convince a country like China or a country like India, which emits, China emits way more than we do, and India is on its way of doing that. We need to convince them to move in the right direction, but we can't do that unless we make the economic case for doing so. Right now in the United States, we have 1.5 million energy efficiency jobs, 1.5 million. And those are jobs trying to lower emissions on different energy sectors. That's already a compelling case. We just have to build off of that and make sure that other countries are following suit. And then the second part of that question, the nuclear part, that sort of stereotype of the nuclear industry is why it's had such a hard time propelling into the future of American energy and actually global energy. And even Chernobyl still has really bad connotations with the nuclear energy industry. Yeah. So what we've found from those two instances is that in Chernobyl, it was a corrupt government that wasn't taking into consideration any safeguards and wasn't managing the nuclear plant at all. And if they would have, that would have never happened, even that long ago with worse technology. And then with Fukushima, it was very similar, where it was really poor management. And a lot of the disasters that happened from Fukushima were actually due to the natural disaster storm and not the nuclear plant itself. And what I would say is that there are, again, like I mentioned earlier, countless studies from universities and research institutions that show that today, here in 2020, nuclear energy has the least risk of hurting people, killing people, and also polluting out of any energy source in the entire world. So again, the technologies, thanks to innovation and thanks to markets and thanks to capitalism, have helped us get there. And we're at a place now where nuclear is safer than anywhere else. And France has seen the benefits of that as they have, tried to use nuclear on a really priority basis, while their neighbor Germany tried to do the 100% renewable thing without nuclear energy. It completely flopped, and now they're using more coal than they've ever used before. So we have to have nuclear as part of the equation, and 21st century nuclear reactors are the best way forward.
Awesome. I was going to ask too, is there, I know there's some people on the right that are concerned about the electoral sort of reverberations that may happen in places, where coal is really important. So do you have any concerns about, the coal industry, jobs, what does that look like? Because the one thing for me that I go back to with energy is that, I want to do something very pragmatic that is not going to completely cripple an industry and that is not going to, put vast economic hardship on one area. I want pragmatic policies that are going to, add jobs, that are going to, boost our GDP, that are going to be good for the environment, that sort of, can give us all the puzzle pieces that we really want on the right. But what do you think about that on an electoral sort of side of things? Where does that put you?
Yeah, I mean, the coal industry has a lot of amazing individuals who have that industry as their entire family's lifeline. And that's what allows them to put food on the table. And that's what allows them to have homes and power their entire lives. And then, of course, in addition to the people who work for the industry, there are people who actually get energy from the industry. And so we have to take that into consideration when we're looking at environmental problems, because those are people and we care about people as conservatives, and people who care about the environment should also care about people. So we have to take that into consideration. What I will say is that the market is moving away from coal, and that's something that is happening. And right now there are about 60,000 coal jobs in the United States, with the 1.5 million jobs in energy efficiency. And so what we need to do is, if the market ends up, phasing out coal, which I don't know, I'm not going to predict that, but if it did, we have to make sure that those people are taken care of. And if it doesn't, which it very well, could go that way as well, we need to make sure that we're lowering emissions on coal plants through technologies like carbon capture. And so I guess the point of that all is to say that we have to take into consideration the coal industry when we're talking about these conversations, and that when you're leaving that industry out, you're forgetting an important part of American society that has a stake in the conversation, and they are people who deserve a voice, and we can't forget them.
Yep.
Absolutely. I think, slow transitions and incentives rather than, disenfranchising and forcing people out of industries, is more of an American ideal anyway, is to take care of each other and
to drive innovation.
Right. Drive innovation, not by force, not by legislation, but by incentivizing people to move in a direction that benefits all of us.
Yeah.
Right.
Something we've talked about too that I love is the Trillion Trees Initiative. So if anybody didn't see it today, the president actually planted the first tree as the ceremonial tree at the White House this morning to celebrate Earth Day. He did that with Kevin McCarthy, with Vice President Pence, the first and second lady. And the initiative, I think, is a really good one. It's one to reduce carbon by planting 1 trillion trees all over the planet. And it's something that would solve such a large part of the problem that we're going to be facing. Mm-hmm. So, that got me to thinking how many young people don't know about things that people on the right are doing or have done for the environment.
Save the Seas Act.
Like Save Our Seas Act, where we have, Trump has funded that more than anybody before him had. There's so many things. The largest, what's the designation is conserving, a piece of land in the United States history was done under Trump's presidency. So what kind of thing would you tell a young person who's asking you, what have Republicans done for the environment that I may not know about?
Yeah, well, first of all, I'm really glad you brought up the Trillion Trees Act, and I was hoping that you'd bring it up because that's one of the reasons I wore my hat today. And I mean, at the end of the day, Republicans have been working on these issues. Leader McCarthy has done a lot on climate change over the past few months, and he's worked with Congressman Walden out in Oregon and a bunch of other Republicans to work on common sense climate policies over the next year that can be implemented. And one of those is the Trillion Trees Act. And those bills fit perfectly into our American climate contract and are actually listed on our website as examples of bills that would fit within the American climate contract. So if you go to climatesolution.eco, that's where you can find some of these bills that are already being proposed, where the Green New Deal has 0 bills behind it. The American climate contract has over a dozen bills that could be implemented today that are supported by Republicans and Democrats. Policies like the Trillion Trees Act, like you said, supported by President Trump and Leader McCarthy. It was introduced by Republican Bruce Westerman. It's also supported by Democrats. These are common sense solutions that are being proposed but aren't being told to the public because they don't have any buzzwords to them. They don't have, they're not flashy. And so we as an organization took it upon ourselves to say, these are the solutions that we need as a globe, and there are going to be plenty more in the future that we need, but they need a framework. They need a way to be messaged. And that's where the American climate contract came out of, to showcase exact policies just like that. What I would also say, in addition to people who think that Republicans have done nothing, is which party has done more on the environment over the past 100 years? Which party created the national parks? Which party created the Clean Air Act and the Clean Water Act? Which party created the Environmental Protection Agency? Which party created the largest public land set aside in United States history, as you mentioned, which was George H.W. Bush for a while, and now President Trump has done it? Which president set aside the largest marine sanctuary of all time? That was George W. Bush, a Republican. Republicans have led on this issue for generations, but we just haven't heard about it. And I will say that we have lost our way on that for a while because we haven't, if you look at a Democratic platform on when they're running for office, the environment's always on there. When you look at a Republican running for office, it's hardly ever on there. We need to return to our party's roots, return to our movement's roots, and embrace these amazing ideas that are already out there on how to engage on environmentalism and fight issues like climate change through pragmatic solutions like the Trillion Trees Act. And I commend the president and Leader McCarthy and the rest of the Republican leadership that's working on these issues right now, because it's not enough to fix the problem here in 2020, but no solution is going to fix the problem in 2020. And I'm all about taking steps in the right direction, and I believe that's what's happening right now.
Yeah, I would say too that I would say on the right, Republicans, their environmentalism problem, it's really a PR problem. I think that that's where a large part of the work needs to be done, is in when we're running elections, when we're making campaign ads, when we're doing these things, when we're talking to people, we need to highlight the things that we're doing and that we have done, because there is really amazing stuff. I mean, this Trillion Trees Act could essentially, it could really change the game. If we get 1 trillion trees planted, it could change what we're looking at entirely. And it's such a simple thing that, I think also it fits so well into who we are as individuals, because so many of us, at least for us, we care so much about individual responsibility. And if I can help take part in the Trillion Trees Act and plant trees myself and be a part of that, that's something that empowers me to be a part of changing things. Whereas a lot of what the left talks about, it doesn't empower individuals. It empowers unions and these shadowy organizations to take on, basically take power from American people and have Americans rely more on the government for certain things. And it takes away the power from industries to innovate as well. So, I think that that's something we have to be cognizant of, is that our problem really in a large part is PR. And we do have to play the game, and we do have to use the words and talk about what we've done and trumpet the accomplishments, because if we don't trumpet them, the left's not going to. And if we don't challenge the media to cover it, they're not going to. That's one thing Trump is great at, is that he knows the media is not going to cover anything good that he does unless he blasts them for it. And sometimes we have to do that to get the coverage on environmental issues. And I think that that's something that, as Republicans, it's something that has to be a priority.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I think that one of the problems that the environmental movement has had for the past couple decades is that it's completely separated individual action from the equation. And it's made it seem like you and I can't make a positive impact. And that's the same argument that you would make if you would say that voting doesn't matter. Because on a singular vote scale, your vote probably doesn't matter. But if everyone starts thinking that way, and it's a culture change where people aren't voting because of that, then it does make a huge difference. And then it's the same on the environment. If you and I have we're 3 people. If we're reaching, 1,000 people right now, and we're able to convince them all to go out and do something positive for the environment this Earth Day, and they're able to tell a couple people, it's a ripple effect. Like, it does matter, and it does add up.
It's actually a big deal.
Culture. It is. And I think we have to remember that we have a place in these conversations as people who care about the environment. And if you don't like the government doing it, you have a way to do it as an individual, as a consumer, and as a change maker in your own community. You have an opportunity to do that. And that's why we need to blast it out more. That's why we need to have better PR. That's why we need an American climate contract, because we need to be able to message this stuff better, which is something we've struggled with as conservatives for a very long time, not just on this issue.
Right. Well, as a consumer, what kind of new practices can we adopt? And
you can use a water bottle like me.
Well, companies like Amazon, with so much, driving around in the Prime, and boxes. Like I'll order something small, and I'll get a huge box filled with plastic and all this stuff. And I realized somebody drove all the way here, but I didn't have the option of saying, hey, just send it with the next shipment. So things like that. I mean, could we be, advocating for smart, common sense policies like that make a difference? And also, I have a question about food and clothing. What are some real common sense things? Because I feel like the left takes it to the extreme, saying that all meat is bad and that we should all become vegans, things like that. So what are your thoughts about all of that, related to consumerism?
Man, consumers have the largest voice on this table. And if you want to make a dent on environmentalism and you want to help the environment, it's not leaning on the government. It's leaning on businesses to change the way they're doing things. Amazon is an incredibly negative impact to the environment. And actually, as a consumer, I'm worried about post-COVID, how much power Amazon is going to have, even more so than they did before. The best way that you can help the environment is support your local businesses and support the people in your communities. And instead of buying everything from Amazon, maybe you can wait more than 2 days to get that new shirt that you're going to order or that new backpack. And so there are so many opportunities to be a better consumer. And I mean, even the reusable water bottle, it saves you money. Like I have 4 reusable water bottles that I carry around all the time. And I have filled those up hundreds, if not thousands of times when I go to the airport or when I'm, on my way to school or whatever it is. And that has saved me so much money from having to buy the plastic water bottles that make an environmental impact. Buying reused clothes. Like I think it's such a trend now in 2020 to look thrifty. I mean, that is an awesome trend because it saves you money and it helps the environment because clothes are, not helpful for the environment. And so it's just being conscious about it. And it's pushing companies to do the right thing. So when you stay at a Hilton hotel and they give you those little plastic shampoo bottles, maybe say, hey, I'd actually rather have a pump in my shower, like some hotels are doing, with just a ton of shampoo, because I don't need to have this little thing that gets replaced every day and wastes a ton of plastic. And so it's up to us as consumers to drive that change. And that's your purchase power is the most powerful thing. If you're purchasing something that's sustainable over something that's not sustainable, that drives change. But you can also urge companies to do the right thing on social media or calling them or whatever. But your purchasing power means so much, and it's forced companies to innovate, and it's forced industries that it's forcing Amazon to rethink the way that they're doing things, and that's because of the power of the consumer. So that's what we can do, and what I would urge people to do is obviously shop local, but also just look into it. Like if you're going to buy a shirt, from a company and you don't really care, maybe look into which company is doing more to environmentally source their products, or look into what they're doing to offset their shipping impact.
I was gonna, it's a
look
good
where your shirt
segue
was
into
made.
China too, with all of the products that are on
American-made
Amazon.
stuff is the best for the environment.
Yep. And that's something I've been driving home a lot, and Landon has as well, is buy American made as often as you can. I think that our standards are so much higher than China. I don't know if you've ever been to China, Benji, but I've been all over China. The standards are atrocious with everything that they produce, absolutely everything. I mean, I remember still vividly the first time I came back from China, and my all my luggage came home, and Landon opened it up. And she was like, were you in a house fire? All of my clothes smelled like
3 different
it was
times.
on fire.
And he was so, he'd been there for 2 weeks and he didn't smell anything.
I had gotten used to it. It had totally changed the way that I smelled and everything.
Right.
And it was such a, I mean, honestly, I wish I could say something positive, but it was such a vile experience, smelling it every day and breathing it every day. And, seeing these practices in real life, it was 100 times worse than I thought it could possibly be, and that's, it just almost seems unimaginable when you come from a place like, California, which is where we used to live. When you go from there and you go to China, you're thinking, oh yeah, it might be really, like downtown LA, like might be a lot of smog, but it was, 1,000 times worse than I had ever imagined. And I went to some of the areas where they do manufacturing, like Guangzhou. And I went to the really nice areas where they're like, there's Silicon Valley, which is Shenzhen. And no matter where you go, you cannot escape this, air quality, because these standards are so atrocious. And like you said, here in America, we have standards. And I think that, again, it goes back to the PR problem. Like Republicans have done so much on the environment. We don't trumpet those accomplishments anywhere near enough. And I think that's something that we really have to do. We have to talk about it. And I see, just like you do, so many Republicans reluctant to talk about Earth Day. I mean, I bet you today there's people who didn't even click on this live stream, or were, had some trepidation about clicking on it because they feel like, oh, this is a Democrat issue. It is not a Democrat issue. We all of us on the right care about the environment, to be honest with you. And I hate to say this, but in California, we were in a very Democrat, laden area. They're everywhere. And I saw more sort of, what would be the word? Like just hypocrisy around environmentalism than I have ever seen here. Nobody talks about it here in Tennessee, but we have the cleanest, lush, gorgeous, well taken care of areas. I mean, I see my neighbors out on the regular, on a daily basis. One of our neighbors is somebody that, a lot of people would know, and you would not believe this guy. He's out there at 5 a.m. every day, taking care of his land, every single day. I mean, people here care. In LA, you'd see people all the time, like they're driving a Tesla and then they'd throw a plastic water bottle out their window. And I swear to God, that's actually something me and Landon saw one time. And we couldn't believe they're driving a Tesla and they throw their water bottles out the window. And that's the type of thing you see in LA. You know, you see trash all over the street. You see it I mean, it's just disgusting. And, you know, those hypocritical values, we can't allow those to not be talked about. We need to talk about our values because our values are good values. We should be proud of them. So that's something that drives me crazy is I wish people would just talk about it, you know, because we have good values.
Yep. And the biggest culprits of environmental degradation are never held accountable. It's the cities in the United States and the cities across the world, and largely China and India. And then, of course, the big cities here in the United States. Those are the cities and the countries that need to be held accountable, and they often aren't, because that's where, you know, it's not easy to hammer on those communities. But the people in Tennessee, I mean, for example, Lamar Alexander, the senator from Tennessee, he was the one who proposed the bill to fund the national parks, which there are 2 in Tennessee. And he paired up with about a half dozen Republicans and some Democrats to do that. But it was a Tennessee Republican that did that. And it's a Tennessee conservationist that lives right next to you that's taking care of his land every single day. We have to re-engage those people, because those are the people who care the most about the environment, but they're not a part of the environmental conversations. And that's why we need to engage. It's a reason for us to engage, and also a reason for us to say, okay, here's what we've done right in the United States. Here's where we've fallen short, but we do need to focus on where we've gone right. And we do need to focus on how American-made technologies and American-made energy and American-made products are the best things that we can possibly have for the environment. Now, that doesn't mean that we don't have improvements to do. Of course we have improvements to do. But compared to China or India or the Middle East, or, you know, places where they drill oil there, I mean, we do things so much cleaner here because what you said earlier, with standards and the ability to actually have consumer knowledge about these things. And the one thing that I will say about this generation, that my generation, that has done really well, is that we've been pushing for so much environmental action that the companies are like, oh, shoot, we have to act. Well, there's no other country in the world that would have that reaction than the United States, responding to a young consumer base caring about the environment.
100%.
Right.
100%.
Yeah, well, I'm excited. I mean, I hope that, you know, our kids and other kids see what you're doing, and, you know, they rally around it and start their own environmental clubs, and just take a more logical, practical approach to making changes that they can see and do and be a part of right in front of them, as opposed to getting in, you know, these endless arguments over, you know,
cause and all that.
Absolutely. And also, you know,
parents can help on that too.
The blame game, as if Trump is, you know, single-handedly responsible for the trash in your city. You know, I think that's really
that's
important.
one of the things that drives me crazy, is that, you know, the Democrats in these big cities get elected talking about climate change when their cities are the ones that are the worst polluters. And honestly, it's something I do have to blame us on the right for, is like, we should be hammering them on climate change. We should be hammering them on environmental issues. We should be like, hey, clean up your cities. It's disgusting. Look at our beautiful rural areas. We don't have this problem. You know, there's some sort of common sense things that we could do. One of those things, though, is that, you know, the conversation, I think, a big mistake that people make on the left, and I'd say just environmentalists in general, is having climate change be a starting point for a conversation. Because, you know, one thing that I've noticed is I know some people who are definitely conservationists and they care about the environment, but if you brought up climate change to them, they would basically laugh it off. And the reason why is they've lived through decades of failed predictions about, you know, warming and about, you know, all these different things that there's going to be. You know, at one point, New York Times was printing stuff about, I'm sure you've seen some of this stuff, the old news clippings, like they were printing stuff saying that, you know, blue gas was going to rise and it would disintegrate people. This is in the New York Times, okay? Really bizarre, crazy stuff. But people lived through all this, that there was going to be an ice age, and then there was going to be, you know, the planet was going to warm so fast that, you know, you would see 10% of humanity die off within that decade. They've seen all these things. New York was going to be underwater, you know? And when they see it not come true, at this point, when you talk to them about climate change, they're just like, yeah, whatever. And so I think really there has to be a more intelligent starting point of just saying like, hey, this is an issue that's out there with young people. Young people really care about the environment, and we need to tell them what our values are. Just saying, communicate to these young people that you care, what you do on a regular basis to care for your environment, what you would prioritize with the environment, and that alone would put us like 100 steps ahead of where we are.
I completely agree that we should be focusing on that. And I want to quickly go back to your point before that question, which is that we should be blaming some of these people for climate change that are actually talking about it a lot. The perfect anecdote to this is my governor currently, Jay Inslee of Washington State. He made his presidential campaign about climate change, but yet he was one of the few states in the country that had rising carbon emissions in 2019, while the United States emissions decreased. That's absurd. And I live in Seattle where that's happening, and even the people there are sick of that hypocrisy. So we have to retake that message, because it can't just be a talking point for people. As someone who deeply cares about the environment, I'm wearing my Grand Teton shirt. Like, that's one of my favorite places in the world. I want to protect that. I don't believe that we should have time to wait for these people to be hypocritical about this issue. We need to take the issue back to the best of our ability and start proposing real solutions. And I agree that these failed predictions have hurt the dialogue. And what I would say to people who have seen those time and time again is that those news articles and those activists didn't even follow the science. I talk to a lot of climate scientists at universities and research institutions across the country with my work. And what they always say is that climate change is slow, incremental change. So a good example of this is if there's a glacier at 32 degrees Fahrenheit, and because of human activity, it jumps to 32.05 degrees, it could start to melt. It's not going to single-handedly cause a hurricane. It's not going to single-handedly cause a wildfire. It's not going to single-handedly cause these things. It's going to incrementally make some of them worse. And so when people blame everything on climate change, every natural disaster, or they say that the world's going to end in 10 or 12 years, or they say that snow is going to be gone by 2000, or they say that blue gas is going to disintegrate us, they are literally not following the science. And so I think that, as conservatives who believe in science on pretty much every, issue, let's believe the science and stop listening to these alarmist people that are making news headlines that don't even follow the science. And so just because what they've said didn't come true doesn't mean that we don't have an impact on our planet. And just because what they said didn't come true doesn't mean that we don't have an impact on climate change of the planet. It's just that they've been stretching the truth for a very long time. And it's up to us to say those incremental changes that are making things worse do matter, but it's not going to kill us in 12 years. And anyone who says that is lying.
Yep. One of the things I do stress to people too is that, this situation where you see headlines on a regular basis that are really alarmist, where they say, they make some crazy prediction, and they say it's like a derivative of a study that just happened. Usually, if you go and you click and you go through and you find that study and you read that study, it's not at all what the study says. I see that happen all the time where, one far left site takes, a section of a study and they turn that into this terrible story, when in reality, if you read the whole study, it's basically saying that that's not the case. That happens so often that I honestly would say I can't believe it, but I really can at this point, just because I've seen it happen so many times. And that's something people need to know is don't take a headline at face value, look at the studies, and then make an educated decision. But beyond that, I was going to bring up somebody that, I don't really care for, but I'm wondering how you feel about his initiatives, Al Gore, because he's a guy who's been out there for a long time talking about, environmental issues. I don't respect really anything about the way he's gone about it. I think that he's profiteered off it. He's driven a lot of alarmism. And at the end of the day, he doesn't live his values. So, that's something that I have trouble with somebody like Leonardo DiCaprio too, is, I've seen these people, I'm in the same industry as them. I've directed, Oscar-winning actors and actresses. They don't live these values, okay? They are on private planes, they're on super yachts, they're on all these things. Like, they emit more than any other human that I know in terms of the individual sort of footprint that they're leaving.
And all 8 of their children.
And all 8 of their kids,
They want to say that we shouldn't be having more than, 2 kids, things like that. It's crazy.
They don't live at all what they're preaching for everybody else. So I wonder, how do you, as somebody who's a conservative environmentalist, how do you feel about somebody like Al Gore?
Well, I think it actually, my answer relates to what you were talking about a little bit earlier, which is that the hypocrisy from people like this has turned people away from environmentalism. And I will tell you that the scientists that I talk to are frustrated by people like Al Gore. They're frustrated by people like AOC because they're taking the science that they have spent years working on that says that humans have an impact on climate change and blowing it out of proportion and using it for political gain and using it for false scenarios that aren't going to exist. And as you said, if you click the link or you actually read the study, that's actually not what it says. And they are frustrated. And Al Gore is one of those culprits of taking things and running with it for a political gain. In the past couple of years, it seems like he's tried to change his tune to because I think he's realized that as someone who probably does care about the environment, as somebody who cares about the environment, he's actually screwed up. Like his work has gone nowhere. Like what has Al Gore accomplished environmentally other than making people hate the climate change?
I think it's been a negative impact. Honestly, I would argue he's had a negative impact on the environment because I think he was a large reason why a large segment of people on the right completely, disconnected from this issue. They felt like it turned into such a circus that they didn't want to be a part of it. So I actually think he's had a negative impact. I really do. I know there's people that would argue that on a corporate level, maybe he got some things that, wouldn't have happened without. But I think on an overall scale, if you look at everything, the totality of it, I think he's actually had a negative impact.
I agree. So that hypocrisy of him flying around the country like Leonardo DiCaprio or AOC or Bernie Sanders while saying that we shouldn't be flying is one of the worst hypocrisies out there. And as somebody who's an environmentalist, I have to fly around to speak and to testify at Congress and do those things. It does have a negative impact on the planet. But instead of saying I shouldn't fly and telling people that they shouldn't fly, I actually go in and offset my carbon impact by donating to a specific initiative that the Nature Conservancy has that plants the proportionate amount of trees based off of people who donate what their impact is flying. You can do that so easily online. And it's Earth Day today, so I'm coming up with a pledge on your show right now that I'm going to do. Every time that I fly for American Conservation Coalition work, our organization will donate to the Nature Conservancy the amount of money that it takes to plant trees to offset my carbon impact, and every single person on our team. Because that's not hypocrisy. We're going around talking about environmentalism and how much we care about the environment. We have to do that to spread our message, and we're going to offset that carbon impact. That's not hypocrisy. And that's the way that we need to be looking at these issues.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I think the individual starts there and how, we are empowered to do what we can, in our own lives to make that difference, because it does make a difference. And focusing just on what other people are doing while not practicing it ourselves is just nothing short of hypocrisy.
Yep. We've got a user question. One of our viewers here, Life Love AR, says, would faster planes or flights be better for the environment? I'm curious.
It's a really good question. So I don't even know the technological aspects of faster planes. I don't even know if we could feasibly do that with passenger planes. I would guess that it would be. I will say that with like high-speed rail or high-speed trains, that's something that a lot of countries have implemented, and something that a lot of entrepreneurs and innovators like Elon Musk are trying to look into right now. Yeah, that could work.
Right.
Like Hyperloop?
Yeah, I mean, stuff like that could easily help reduce emissions. Obviously, that's a huge investment, and I'm not here to say if that's worth it.
Yeah.
But I do think
there has to be a cost-benefit analysis on those things that's pretty deep, because you look at, say, the high-speed, the rail they were going to do in California from San Francisco to LA. I'm trying to think if it went further down than LA. I know it was at least LA to San Francisco. They proposed this a while ago. It was billions of dollars. They did this cost-benefit analysis that was a total joke. They ended up being wrong. Like, all the Republicans in the legislature told them they were wrong. And they had started the project. They had put all this money out. They'd already spent all this money. And at a certain point, they realized it was going to be so many billions of dollars more. I want to say it was hundreds of billions, but I don't have the numbers in front of me, so I can't say the exact number. But they ended up ending the deal. They had already spent so much money, and they ended up just stopping. Part of it's built, and they were just like, you know what? Never mind. This is too expensive. We can't do this. They actually started building it, though. And I think that's one of the traps we fall into, or I shouldn't say we, I should say the Democrats that, they say these things are going to solve the problems. They're not actually looking at the cost benefit. And I think that that's the same thing with the Green New Deal, is the cost benefit analysis isn't there in a way that tells us, hey, these things would be worth it and would be valuable to Americans. I don't believe that to be the case. I think it's actually telling us the exact opposite. This is something that is going to cripple America. And it's also something that just isn't in alignment with our values as Americans either. So, I think that was a good question from her. I would say, I know that there were those planes, Concorde. Yeah, the Concorde. But I don't know whatever happened to the Concorde.
Some kind of
something
issue
happened with it, but
safety-wise, I think, or something.
I know they always looked fun. I know that. I mean, I hate to say it on an environmental episode, but I would like to fly in one of those before I die. It just looks fun. It looks like a fun thing to do. Have you ever seen those, the Concorde planes?
I have. I totally forgot that those existed.
Yeah, those look fun. I don't know what happened to them, though. So, yeah, I was just going back, looking at these user questions. There seems to be a lot of people who don't like Al Gore. Some people are wondering, why should they care about this issue and prioritize it when there's some of the people are like, hey, frankly, child trafficking matters more to me than the environment. I personally think that that's an easy way to cop out of the issue, because, you can always say something's more important than another thing. Like somebody could say, oh, well, why don't you use this time right now instead of doing this live stream to go play with your kids? Yeah, being with my kids is a priority for us, but that doesn't mean I'm not capable of doing other things too, and I think that in life, there's a healthy balance. And if you want to contribute the best of you to each thing, you can't give all of yourself to any one thing. You have to be able to take time away from it and be really your most effective. That's how I've always felt. But what do you think to the people who say that?
Yeah, I mean, I would completely build off of what you're saying by saying that I'm not going to convince anybody that this needs to be the number one issue if they don't think it's the number one issue. But why it should be one of your top issues is that it's similar to the national debt in the fact that it's always kind of looming there. Like the environment's always looming there. And maybe it's not as tangible as the economic hardships of COVID-19 or the immigration problems or guns or whatever. It's not as tangible and it's not on the news all the time, but it is looming there. And the more that we pollute and the more that we hurt the environment, the worse that problem gets. Kind of like the more we spend into oblivion, the worse the national debt gets. And at some point, it's going to come to a breaking point. So as people who care about the environment, I'm not going to tell you that you have to make this your top issue when you go and vote or reach out to an elected official, but at least put it in your top 5 or your top 10 instead of leaving it out, because the success of our environment equals the success of our economy. We need to have a strong environment to have a strong economy, because if you understand how humans work, it's an ecosystem. We need resources to power our globe. We need resources to power our homes. We need thriving ecosystems to put food on the table. Like we need
look at food. Look at food by itself. If you look at China, where there's no standards, a lot of their farmland is totally destroyed because they didn't have any standards. There's actually, what is it that they have in there?
Rice.
They have arsenic, right?
They have arsenic.
They have arsenic in a lot of their soil, and I mean, there's a myriad of other issues there. But you look here in the U.S. at our farmland. If we don't at least on a very practical basis say, hey, what do we do to make sure that we are going to have fertile soil, that we are going to be able to grow everything the same way we're able to grow it now, and actually, increase that at some point. If we don't take those steps, we end up in a very precarious position where we're depending on other countries for our food, which is, a position where right now, I think you can actually tie this pretty neatly together with coronavirus, because we're learning right now, you don't want to rely on China. You don't want to rely on another country for something that you absolutely need in a crisis. You need food, you need medicine, you need access to these things. And it's something that, frankly, we should be producing here, period. And, it's something, a second issue, it's not really tied to this, but that we've talked about a lot is foreign ownership of our farmland. China's increased their ownership of our farmland tenfold in the last decade. And at this point, land that's larger than the size of Ohio is owned by foreign-owned companies. So, this is something that we have to take seriously, just on a basis of like where our food's coming from. If we want it to stay coming from America, we have to take some of these issues seriously.
Yeah, the environment has a daily impact on us more than we think. And I actually think coronavirus has proven that. I mean, maybe not every single person, but nearly everyone, the one thing that we want to do is go outside and breathe fresh air and like get out and during coronavirus. That's the one thing that I want to do. I'm trying to take as many calls as I can outside, and when I have a free moment, go on a quick run. And that just proves how important the environment is. And so if we're not prioritizing it in our political decisions or in our consumer decisions, we're forgetting about how important of a impact it has on our day-to-day lives, whether it's food or whether that's just powering our homes with the energy that we have, or it's just the fresh air that we all love and breathe every day.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, totally agree.
I was just thinking one thing worth mentioning too is, on the human trafficking side, I've done a lot of research on that. There are some correlations that you could say, supporting countries that, use child labor and exploit children to, mass export products, things like that, that aren't, ethically, their standards are poor.
It actually ties in.
We shouldn't be supporting countries like that.
Great point.
Right. And we enable, those industries to thrive. Even if you just look at like how diamond, the whole diamond controversy in the 90s, of the blood diamonds, things like that. Once we are aware of how our things are being made and the true cost of them, that does play into, some aspect of human trafficking. So I just thought that was worth.
No, that's actually an interesting point. I hadn't thought about that. If you think about it, it correlates, really neatly into what goes on in China with having no standards with, the environment, and they get away with child labor there because they have no standards. And those same factories those kids work at are the ones emitting all of this stuff. And, God knows the health problems those kids are going to have, unfortunately, as they get older. But these things, they do actually tie together. So for those people, the person who was in there saying, why focus on this, when I could be focused on human trafficking? Well, this is why. You could actually tie these issues together in a lot of ways, that if we make one a priority, that, it will actually benefit the other. And it's not to say one, that the environment is more important than that or anything like that. It's just saying, you can walk and chew gum at the same time, basically. So one of our users let us know, by the way, actually two of our users, Refocus Zone and Barbara Catan, let us know that the Concorde was too expensive to maintain. And that is why they are not here. And so I think, do you have any other questions?
No,
I feel like we could probably.
One thing, Benji, do you guys have anything you're working on visually that's like, a great tool that we could spread around and kids could have, that like, an infographic that makes sense? Like I'll give, the AOC's people credit. What they did
that's
was
the one
some
thing you got to give
propaganda
credit.
there. So is there something just visually that's enticing that can tell our story and represent what you're doing? And get kids that are conservative, from conservative,
excited about environmental issues. Because if you are unsure what she's talking about, there was I'm sure you've seen it, the animated Green New Deal video thing that AOC did with it was some animators from Vice or something like that.
It was great.
It was a great piece. If you're a kid, I see how you watch it and you can get excited about the issues because you don't know anything about, these proposed solutions, and it's all about feelings instead of, hard, policy. And it's sort of the same thing, actually, that I've talked to a lot of Republicans in Congress and, at the White House about, is that, AOC, she got elected off of a commercial. If you go back and you watch the commercial that she ran on, that is what drove and catapulted her. It was messaging. It was all about feeling. And it was, you didn't know from watching it, if somebody watched it and they were an independent, they weren't thinking about party when they watched it. They were just like, oh, it's all about feeling. So, we have to fight with these visual tools too. And so I hope that's something you guys plan to do, is have some visuals to get kids excited about issues, and on an individual basis, let them know that they can have an impact. It's not just about, writing your congressman, and it's not about protesting. It's about actual doing in your life to do things that are actionable. So I hope that's something you guys are planning to do.
Yeah. So there's 3 Well, that point's well taken. I actually took a note already to make an animated video based on the American Climate Contract. There's 3 places that people should go if they're trying to get easy access to content. The first is our YouTube. We've got a lot of great short videos on, you know, where capitalism has gone right on the environment and how we can move forward with those types of reforms, and as well as some content about the American Climate Contract. The second is visiting our American Climate Contract website, because nothing's complicated on there. It's all pretty simple. It's climatesolution.eco. So I definitely suggest that. And then the last thing that I would suggest is on our website, just our organization's website, which is acc.eco. We have a policy tab that has a bunch of different policy information, but one of the tabs is one-pagers, and it's just simple one-pagers with a lot of infographics that has to do with energy and climate and how to look at these issues, as well as capitalism. So acc.eco, climatesolution.eco, and our YouTube, which is the American Conservation Coalition.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Thanks,
well, this encapsulates what conservatives need to have a conversation on when it comes to Earth Day. I actually think this is the perfect conversation and the best conversation I've even had in a long time, because this allowed us to show how conservatives can re-engage on Earth Day and for environmentalism down the line. So I think this is one of the best conversations that someone could listen to if they cared about this issue. And I'm going to share it out a lot just because this was a lot of fun for me as well. So thanks for having me on.
Yeah, it'll also be on YouTube as well. So this live streamed on, this is the first time actually we've done a live stream on the YouTube channel too. So it'll live in both places. You'll be able to find it on Periscope, Twitter, or YouTube.
I'll be able to show my kids someday.
Yep.
Awesome.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. Happy Earth Day, and I do really appreciate the opportunity.
Yep.
Thanks so much, Benji.
Have a good day.
Have a great Earth Day.
Thank you. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. All right, we're signing off, guys.
Thank you guys for joining us.
On this new platform, I have to go over here to turn it off. But it was great to have you all in here. I hope you all have a good Earth Day, and I hope that you find some time to go outside today and enjoy.
I'm going to go work on our garden that we started.
Yep. I'm going to go work on the garden.
That's what I'm going to do.
Bye, guys.
Bye, y'all.